Major League Baseball in the late 90s and early 2000s was defined by home runs and high-scoring games. Sosa and McGwire were chasing home run records, Barry Bonds was breaking baseball, and the league-wide run environment was at an all-time high. This is what baseball fans refer to as the steroid era. And in the midst of all this stood a 5'11", 170-pound pitcher that dominated hitters at a rate that has never been replicated in the history of the game. While many other pitchers' career numbers ballooned during this era, Pedro Martinez's numbers got better. So how was he so far ahead of everyone else during this time, and just how good was Pedro Martinez at his peak? Pedro's MLB journey began in 1988, when he signed with the Los Angeles Dodgers as a 17-year-old prospect out of the Dominican Republic. Pedro weighed just 150 pounds during those days. In rookie ball, he developed a changeup that would become the centerpiece of his arsenal later on, devastating hitters for years. After pitching to a 2.28 ERA in 170 innings across multiple levels at just age 19, he was called up to the Major League team in 1993, joining his brother Ramon. Pedro would shine early on, finishing 9th in Rookie of the Year voting as a reliever for the Dodgers. Despite Ramon Martinez insisting that his little brother would be better than him, the Dodgers decided to trade Pedro that offseason. With a hole at second base, they had to make a move, and they sent Pedro to Montreal for Delino DeShields, a second baseman who looked to be a rising star. DeShields was coming off a 4.5 WAR season at just 24 years old, so at the time it didn't look like too crazy of a move. However, he completely fell off with the Dodgers. Pedro, on the other hand, was pushed into a starter role in Montreal, and he thrived right away, while also gaining a reputation of being a headhunter as he hit 6 batters in his first 5 starts. His FU mentality that he carried on the mound made his opponents feel like many of these were intentional.
Everybody says I'm 160-something pounds there. Everybody wanted to charge the mound. If I was 250 pounds, nobody would charge the mound. If I was Andy Bennett, nobody wanted to hit anybody. But if he wants to take my check, he can take it, because I'm not going to quit pitching inside.
On April 18th of 1994, he took a perfect game into the 8th inning. Then he hit Reggie Sanders, who charged the mound, starting a huge brawl. However, Pedro stayed in this game, keeping his no-hitter intact through the 8th, but eventually lost it in the 9th inning. Just a few weeks later, he found himself in another altercation with Derek Bell. After throwing high and in with 2 strikes, Pedro was able to strike Bell out, who then decided on his way back to the dugout that he wanted to charge the mound, starting another brawl. Similar to April 18th, Pedro would stay in the game and get the win here. From 1994 to 1995, inside pitches from Pedro resulted in 3 brawls and 23 ejections across 5 separate incidents. Braves Hall of Fame coach Bobby Hawks said, "It's not just me, it's everybody." It's generally felt around the league that Martinez throws at guys' heads. Whether it was intentional or not, over the next few weeks, Expos coach had him throw bullpens with stand-in mannequins in between starts to try and fix the hit-by-pitch issue, and it worked wonders. Pedro didn't hit anybody over his next 7 starts and gave up just 11 runs across his next 38 innings pitched. Just when he was starting to blossom into a star on a Montreal team that held the best record in baseball, the league shut down for the infamous 1994 players' strike. What looked to be a championship-level team filled with young stars like Larry Walker, Moises Alou, and Marquise Grissom never had the opportunity to make a World Series run. Pedro finished the year with a 3.42 ERA across 144 innings pitched. His 24.3% strikeout rate ranked 3rd among starters, all while being just 22 years old. When games finally started back up in 1995, Pedro picked up right where he left off. On June 3rd, he took a perfect game into the 9th inning, where he retired the side, finishing the 15th perfect game in MLB history. Well, that's what would have happened if his offense could have mustered up just 1 run for him. Instead, he went back out there for the 10th, and after giving up a hit, he was taken out of the game. The following season was the first time Pedro was voted an All-Star, after posting a strong first half, that being a 3.65 ERA and a 3.07 FIP across 120 innings. However, he finished the season with a 3.70 ERA, which would be the worst of his young career. While the results might not have been his best, there was still a silver lining. A 3.27 FIP, 24.6% strikeout rate, and 16.9% strikeout to walk rate were all career best as a starter. The .290 batting average on balls in play he allowed in 1996 was a big outlier as well. This all suggested that there would be much better days ahead for Pedro, and there sure were going to be. Pedro started out on fire as the 1997 season began. He was transcending from a really good up-and-coming pitcher to one of the best pitchers in all of baseball. Through his first 7 starts, he posted a 1.20 ERA. He was voted an All-Star for the 2nd straight year, and by the end of the season, he had the Cy Young race on lock. Pedro led the MLB in ERA, FIP, strikeout rate, strikeout to walk rate, hits per 9, WHIP, and complete games. His 32.2% strikeout rate was ridiculous at the time. The MLB league average strikeout rate in 1997 was just 17%, so him striking guys out at a rate that was over 15% above league average was ridiculous. His ERA never went above 2 at any point in this season, making it easy for Cy Young voters to make their pick. At just 25 years old, he took home his first, beginning what would be one of the most dominant stretches from any player in MLB history. With Martinez set to make much more money than the Expos could afford in arbitration, he became the top trade candidate on the market that offseason. The Padres, Indians, Yankees, Rockies, and Red Sox were all some of those teams. Ultimately, it was Boston who made the best offer, and in November of 1997, Pedro was officially a Red Sox. He became just the 2nd pitcher to ever be traded immediately following a Cy Young season. Only David Cohen had done so in 1994. Roger Clemens would do it the following year, and R.A. Dickey was the last to do it in 2012. The question at this point was whether or not Pedro would re-sign with Boston, as he was set to become a free agent the next offseason. Martinez said initially that he wouldn't sign an extension following the trade, but his mind quickly changed when Boston put a record-breaking 7-year, $90 million offer on the table. He wasted no time signing it, and Boston had locked up arguably the best pitcher in baseball for the entirety of his prime. In his first year at Fenway, Pedro would slightly regress, just as any pitcher would following a season like 1997. Some early season struggles coincided with a stomach issue that caused him to lose 5 pounds, and a pitcher of his size really can't afford to lose weight like that. In late May, there was a 4-start stretch where he gave up 23 earned runs and 37 hits across just 24 innings. But like all great pitchers do, he would settle in, posting a 2.49 ERA the rest of the way. He was named an All-Star and finished runner-up to Roger Clemens in Cy Young voting. When a down year for you is considered a career year for most pitchers, you know you're good. That season brought on Pedro's first career postseason appearance, as the Red Sox would face off with the Indians in the ALDS. In Game 1, Pedro showed why Boston gave him all that money, throwing 7 innings, striking out 8, and allowing 3 in a Red Sox win. His manager wouldn't throw him on short rest with the season on the line in Game 4, a game the Red Sox would lose. But Pedro would be back in Cleveland very soon with some special performances. At this point in his career, he had thrown over 1,100 innings with just a 2.98 ERA. Along with 3 All-Star selections, a Cy Young win, all at just 26 years old. And he wasn't even close to his ceiling yet, so stay tuned. After a full season with the new team under his belt, Pedro was ready for what would be a historic 1999 season, as he would reach heights that we've never seen before. At the halfway point in the year, he had thrown a quality start in 17 of his 18 outings, which resulted in him starting in the All-Star game at his home field in Boston. So let's see what he did against the game's best. He got Hall of Famer Barry Larkin to whiff at a disgusting changeup to start the game. Hall of Famer Larry Walker, who was in the middle of his prime, went down on a painted 97-mile-an-hour fastball. And then should-be Hall of Famer Sammy Sosa, who was also in the middle of his prime, got blown up by a 96-mile-an-hour fastball. The next inning featured Mark McGwire getting his doors blown off, and Hall of Famer Jeff Bagwell striking out on this airbender. He took home the All-Star MVP in what would be maybe the most iconic All-Star performance of all time. Pedro wouldn't slow down in the second half, where in September he posted maybe the most ridiculous month we've ever seen from a pitcher. Across 5 outings, he had a .88 ERA and struck out 46.7% of hitters. This included a 17 strikeout, 0 walk, 1 hit complete game versus the New York Yankees. He finished the year with a 2.07 ERA, 313 strikeouts, and 23 wins, giving him the Triple Crown. In a season where the league-wide strikeout rate was just 16.4%, Pedro put up a 37.5% strikeout rate, which would be the highest of all time until Garrett Cole topped it in 2019. He struck out 15 or more on 6 separate occasions, and double digits in 19 games. He was truly in another world compared to the rest of the league. Pedro's 2.43 ERA plus that year led baseball by a wide margin, meaning that in terms of run prevention, he was 143% better than a league average pitcher in 1999. What if I told you though that he got unlucky despite all of these unheard of results? Since he struck out everybody, walked nobody, and led the league in home runs per 9 innings, his 1.39 FIP was the best in the live ball era, which dates back to 1920. And he did this at the height of the steroid era, in the 6th most hitter-friendly ballpark in baseball. His FIP being 67 points lower than his ERA was the 10th widest margin among all starters, so technically there was still a ton of room for his ERA to improve. All of this made it very easy for voters to select him as the unanimous AL Cy Young in 1999, but the voters did their thing, snubbing him from what should have been a pretty easy AL MVP win. That year, Pedro was almost 50% more valuable than the next best pitcher in the American League. The difference in wins above replacement between Pedro and the next best, which was Mike Mussina, was equal to the difference between Mussina and Eddie Guardado at 124th in WAR. Meanwhile, the actual winner of the award that year had just over half of Pedro's WAR, and didn't headline any offensive statistical categories in his own league. 2 writers left Pedro entirely off their ballots, which resulted in him finishing in 2nd place. One of them was George King of the New York Post, whose reasoning was that MVP is for everyday players. Pitchers have their own award. Which is a terrible argument in my opinion, but he also went out and voted for 2 pitchers just 1 year before saying this. Had Pedro received a 4th place vote or higher from any of these guys, he would have taken home the MVP. Pedro continued to let his performance speak for itself in the 1999 playoffs though. The wildcard Red Sox would take on the AL Central champion Cleveland Indians for the 2nd straight season. Pedro would have no trouble in Game 1, starting off the series with 4 scoreless frames. But after the 4th, he felt pain in his back, forcing him to leave the game early, and the Indians would walk it off in the 9th inning. They would win Game 2 as well in blowout fashion, putting them up 2-0 in the series. With Pedro doubtful to return and the Red Sox offense non-existent, the season looked like it was coming to an end. Going back to Fenway may have been just what they needed though, as they would win Game 3 and erupted in Game 4 with a 23-7 victory. The baseball world wanted to know if Pedro would be healthy enough for the decisive Game 5, and the answer was leaning no as game time approached, especially when it was announced that Brett Saberhagen would get the ball. But after 8 runs were put up on him and Derek Lowe in the first 3 innings, the cameras panned over to the bullpen where we saw Pedro Martinez warming up. A nightmare for the Cleveland offense. Pedro, despite being far from 100%, entered a winner-take-all 8-8 ball game in the bottom of the 4th. The red-hot Cleveland bats that had just mashed 8 runs in 3 innings were completely silenced. Pedro went on to pitch one of the most improbable performances in playoff history, especially when you consider the context. 6 innings, no runs, no hits, 3 walks, 8 strikeouts, and a day with the New York Yankees in the 1999 ALCS. His start in that series would be delayed until Game 3 due to him pitching in Game 5 of the division series. By that point though, they were already down 2-0 and had just one hope, the best pitcher on the planet. In an anticipated matchup for Yankees ace Roger Clemens, Pedro would continue his playoff dominance as he threw 7 shutout innings with 12 strikeouts and just 2 hits allowed. It would be enough to win Game 3, but the Yankees would take the series in 5 and go on to win the World Series for the 2nd straight year. Pedro's Game 3 victory would be the only game the Yankees would lose the entire 1999 postseason. So, after pitching arguably the greatest season in the entire 20th century, what would Pedro do next? Well, of course, he would pitch the greatest season in the 21st century. Remember when I said he got pretty unlucky in 1999? Well, in 2000, that luck would start to turn around. In May, he would allow just 4 earned runs across 42 innings pitched, throwing 3 complete games in the process. By mid-June, his ERA dropped under 1 after throwing 6 innings of 1-run ball against the Yankees. In August, Pedro found himself yet again in the middle of a brawl after hitting Gerald Williams in the first at-bat of the game. It seems that he may just do this to motivate himself because he went on to throw a 1-hit shutout, striking out 13 after the brawl diffused. With a strong finish to the season, Pedro had completed arguably the most dominant pitching season ever, and objectively the best season ever in terms of run prevention. The run environment that he was pitching in back in 2000 was the 5th highest run environment in the modern era. This made Pedro's 1.74 ERA in 2000 infinitely more impressive than a 1.74 ERA in a run environment like the 1960s. ERA Plus is a great measurement for this, as every season ERA is standardized to where 100 is average. Right here we see the ERA Plus of some of the American League's best pitchers that year, and you can see just how far ahead of the pack Pedro was. His 291 ERA Plus is by far the highest we've ever seen, meaning that he was 191% better than a league average pitcher in the year 2000. The 2.05 difference in ERA between him and the next lowest in the American League is the biggest gap we've ever seen, and a 0.737 whip is the lowest ever recorded. Despite his dominance, Boston missed the playoffs by 2.5 games, as their division rival Yankees would take the East and go on to win the World Series. Across a 2-season stretch, Pedro ranked first among all pitchers in WAR, ERA, ERA Plus, WHIP, FIP, hits per 9, strikeout rate, and strikeout to walk rate. And while this was his absolute peak, his prime was not over just yet. Pedro would continue his historic play well into the 2001 season, where he held a 2.26 ERA and a 1.44 FIP through June. He was on track to replicate his 99 and 2000 run, until he went down with a shoulder injury at the very end of June. It was the 3rd straight season where he dealt with shoulder issues, but this time it was much more serious. The injury would keep him out for 2 months, and we wouldn't see him again until August. Pedro would come back and pitch through pain for 4 starts, but after beefing with his owner about whether or not he was healthy enough to pitch, Pedro finally ended his season after a start on September 7th. Although his numbers were elite when he was on the field in 2001, he was never really 100%, and a full offseason to recover would do him well. Despite the time off, his next season would get off to a terrible start, as he posted a 6.91 ERA in his first 3 starts. People started to wonder if Pedro's best days were behind him at this point in his career, and if the injuries were starting to catch up to his small frame. And that's when he turned it on. Over the rest of the season, which was 27 starts, Pedro pitched to a 1.90 ERA, which put him back in the running for the AL Cy Young Award. But it wouldn't be enough for these voters, as they gave the award to Barry Zito. When comparing the two of them that year, Pedro was superior in every stat category other than wins and innings pitched. And back in 2001, pitcher wins were king, so Zito took home the award. Pedro and the Red Sox would find themselves in the postseason again in 2002, where he would get his revenge against Zito, as he just barely outpitched him in a Game 5 victory to send Boston to the ALCS. That series against New York would be Pedro's first real playoff failure. He took a loss in Game 3, giving up 4 across 7 innings. In Game 7, he got the ball again, and was very good through 7 innings, as the Red Sox held a 5-2 lead. Some would put what happened next on Pedro, and some would put it on his manager for leaving him in too long. He would give up 3 runs without recording an out in the bottom of the 8th, which tied the game. And in extra innings, Aaron Boone would send the Yankees to the World Series with an iconic walk-off home run. Not an ideal series for the best pitcher in baseball. His following season would again be elite, capping off a 7-year stretch of dominance that was statistically unlike any other in MLB history. When comparing those same 7 years to the greatest lefty of all time, Randy Johnson, Pedro was quite clearly the better pitcher. A 2.20 ERA, a 2.16 FIP, and a 2.16 ERA Plus across a 7-year stretch is simply unheard of. And since he retired in 2009, there have only been 6 occurrences in which a pitcher finished the season with an ERA Plus over 200. Pedro alone averaged it for 7 years. In 2004, he would see some big-time regression hit, as his ERA fell to 3.9. But it was in the 2004 postseason where the Red Sox finally got past the New York Yankees, coming back from a 3-0 deficit in the ALCS. In Game 3 of the World Series, Pedro got the ball, and he delivered a special performance for the Boston faithful.
Here's a 1-2 to Matheny. That for Pedro, his first strikeout. Martinez looks like he has settled in. Against Martinez tonight. Another strikeout. That's 4. That's 11 straight. And he strikes out. 5 strikeouts for Pedro Martinez. inning over.
Be tough to take him out now, too.
7 shutout innings to put the Red Sox up 3-0 in the series. Pedro's 9.23 championship win probability added was the second highest on the Red Sox in the series. They would finally break the curse of the Great Bambino, winning their first World Series in 86 years. In what feels like a storybook ending, the man who defeated the Steroid Era goes out on top as that era came to an end. After an All-Star season in 2005 with the Mets at age 33, Pedro would battle injuries for the remaining 4 years of his career. Throwing 210 innings per year at his small size seemed to have finally caught up to him, and in 2009 he would make his final start as a Philly. At his best, there was nobody, and I mean nobody, who was as dominant as him on the mound. He gave us not one, but 2 of the best pitching seasons we've ever witnessed in the highest run environment since integration. And that is how a 5'11", 170-pound pitcher defeated the Steroid Era.